Behind the marble walls of Topkapi Palace, hundreds of women lived in silence, luxury, and terror. They were watched every hour of every day, yet somehow, poison found its way into golden cups, curses were sewn into pillows, and sultans woke up screaming from nightmares they swore were not their own. This was the Ottoman Harem, not just a place of beauty and silk, but a battlefield of whispered spells, forbidden magic, and murder disguised as fate. Historians still argue about how much of it was real sorcery, and how much was simply the deadliest political game in history, dressed up as witchcraft so no one could be blamed. Today we step past the guarded doors and into a world where a wrong glance, a jealous rival, or a muttered prayer over a piece of wax could end a life. Was it magic? Was it poison? Or was it simply the most brutal court politics the world has ever seen, hidden behind superstition? By the end of this video, you'll understand why the Ottoman court feared witches more than assassins, and why some of the empire's most powerful women were accused of casting the deadliest spells of all. Behind the marble walls of Topkapi Palace, hundreds of women lived in silence, luxury, and terror. They were watched every hour of every day, yet somehow, poison found its way into golden cups, curses were sewn into pillows, and sultans woke up screaming from nightmares they swore were not their own. This was the Ottoman Harem, not just a place of beauty and silk, but a battlefield of whispered spells, forbidden magic, and murder disguised as fate. Historians still argue about how much of it was real sorcery, and how much was simply the deadliest political game in history, dressed up as witchcraft so no one could be blamed. Today we step past the guarded doors and into a world where a wrong glance, a jealous rival, or a muttered prayer over a piece of wax could end a life. Was it magic? Was it poison? Or was it simply the most brutal court politics the world has ever seen, hidden behind superstition? By the end of this video, you'll understand why the Ottoman court feared witches more than assassins, and why some of the empire's most powerful women were accused of casting the deadliest spells of all. To understand the fear of witchcraft in the harem, you have to understand Büyü, the Ottoman Turkish word for magic or sorcery. In the 16th and 17th centuries, belief in the supernatural was not fringe superstition. It was woven into everyday life, even among the educated elite. People believed that words, written or spoken with intent, carried real power. A verse from the Quran inscribed on a talisman could protect a newborn from the evil eye. But that same belief in spiritual power had a darker mirror. If holy words could protect, then twisted words, spells, and objects could harm. Court records and travelers' accounts describe practices such as writing a person's name on paper and burying it with pins, melting wax figures shaped like a rival, or hiding cursed objects, hair, nail clippings, knotted thread, inside a target's mattress or clothing. In the harem, where every woman had a rival and everyone had something to lose, these practices were not distant legend. They were tools. Whether or not the magic worked almost didn't matter. The accusation itself was often weapon enough to destroy a woman's life. Here's the part most people miss. Accusations of witchcraft in the Ottoman court were rarely about actual magic. They were about power. If you wanted to destroy a rival concubine, poisoning her directly was risky. It could be traced, and if discovered, the punishment was severe. But accusing her of sorcery? That was almost untouchable. It played on the Sultan's deepest fears: his health, his mind, his ability to father heirs, and it required no physical evidence beyond rumor and suspicion. A well-placed accusation could see a rival exiled to the old palace, strangled by the deaf-mute executioners of the court, or drowned in the Bosphorus, sewn into a weighted sack. Ottoman chronicles and foreign ambassadors' letters, including reports from Venetian bailiffs stationed in Istanbul, describe multiple cases where sudden illness in the sultan or a prince was blamed not on disease, but on sorcery performed by a jealous woman in the harem. In a world without modern medicine, where a fever could kill a healthy man in days, someone must have cursed him was often easier to accept than he simply got sick. No figure embodies harem intrigue more than Kösem Sultan. Originally a slave girl believed to be of Greek origin, she rose to become the favorite consort of Sultan Ahmed I, and later the most powerful Valid Sultan in Ottoman history, effectively ruling the empire as regent for decades through her sons and grandsons. Kösem's reign was legendary for both her political brilliance and the sheer number of enemies she made. Rival accounts, many admittedly written by her enemies after her death, accused her of employing sorceresses and fortune-tellers within the palace to secure her position, ensure the loyalty of her sons, and even to influence the mental state of rivals. Whether true or exaggerated propaganda by the family that eventually had her killed, the accusations tell us something important. Even the most powerful woman in the empire wasn't safe from whispers of witchcraft, and eventually, those whispers, combined with real political conspiracy, contributed to her downfall. In 1651, after decades of ruling from the shadows, Kösem was strangled in the palace on the orders of her own daughter-in-law, Hürrem Sultan, in one of the most dramatic power transitions in Ottoman history. If sorcery was the accusation, poison was often the reality behind it. The Ottoman harem's kitchens were among the most tightly controlled spaces in the palace, precisely because everyone knew poison was the era's most reliable, untraceable weapon. Tasters were employed for the Sultan's food. Silver dishware was used because it was believed to visibly react to certain poisons. Despite these precautions, Ottoman history is dotted with sudden, suspicious deaths of princes, favorites, and rivals that many historians now believe were poisonings, disguised as illness, or conveniently, blamed on curses. Arsenic, hemlock, and other slow-acting toxins available through court physicians or apothecaries gave the poisoner time and distance from suspicion. Because so many of these deaths were later folded into stories of sorcery, she was cursed. The evil eye took him. It becomes nearly impossible for historians today to separate genuine occult belief from what was, in cold reality, calculated murder. This blending of poison and superstition is exactly why the harem's reputation for witchcraft persists, two different kinds of danger, hiding behind the same word. No discussion of harem intrigue is complete without the chief black eunuch, or Kızlar Asa, the guardian of the harem's gates and, often, one of the most politically powerful men in the entire empire. Eunuchs were the only men, besides the Sultan and his young sons, permitted inside the harem, and they controlled nearly everything. Who saw the Sultan, which messages left the walls, which concubines received gifts or invitations, and crucially, which rumors reached the Sultan's ears. This made the chief eunuch an essential ally, or a terrifying enemy, for any woman playing the game of survival. Historical accounts describe eunuchs accepting bribes to deliver false accusations of witchcraft against rivals, smuggling protective amulets to their patrons, or even, according to some claims, sourcing cursed objects from outside contacts to place in a rival's chambers. Because eunuchs moved between the harem and the outside world, visiting markets, contacting fortune-tellers, arranging deliveries, they were often the actual physical link between magic performed outside the palace and its effects felt within it. Without their cooperation, willing or coerced, most harem intrigue simply couldn't function. One of the most bitter rivalries in harem history was between Nurbanu Sultan, the powerful Valide Sultan and mother of Sultan Murad III, and Safiye Sultan, Murad's favorite consort and eventual successor as Valide Sultan. For years, these two women fought for influence over the same man from two different generations of power, the ruling mother and the ruling favorite. Contemporary Venetian ambassador reports, which closely followed Ottoman court politics for trade reasons, describe a court thick with accusations flying between the two camps, charges of poisoning attempts, hired sorceresses, and cursed gifts exchanged as supposed tokens of affection. Some accounts claim Nurbanu attempted to have Safiye removed from favor through supernatural means before her own death in 1583, after which Safiye rose to unrivaled power for the next decade. What makes this rivalry so revealing is how openly foreign diplomats reported on witchcraft as a normal, expected feature of harem political warfare, not as rare scandal, but as the ordinary background noise of court life. To outside observers, the Ottoman harem wasn't just rumored to use magic in its power struggles, it was assumed. Perhaps no woman in Ottoman history attracted more accusations of sorcery than Hürrem Sultan, known in the West as Roxolana. A former slave who rose to become the legal wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, breaking centuries of harem tradition, Hürrem's meteoric rise scandalized the court. Suleiman had never married a concubine before. He freed her and made her his legal wife, showering her with a devotion so unusual for a sultan that many at court simply couldn't explain it through ordinary means. And so, rumors spread, Hürrem must have bewitched him. Some stories claimed she used love potions or charms obtained from witches to bind Suleiman's heart so completely that he abandoned the traditional practice of taking multiple consorts. Historians today largely dismiss these tales as the court's way of processing genuine, deep affection between two people in a system that expected political marriages, not romance. But the persistence of the Hürrem the Witch legend for centuries afterward tells us something powerful. In Ottoman society, a woman gaining unprecedented influence over a man in power was almost always explained through supernatural suspicion, rather than simply her intelligence and charisma. By the mid-1600s, a conservative religious movement known as the Kadızadeli gained enormous influence in Istanbul, preaching against what they saw as un-Islamic innovations, including superstition, amulet use, and folk magic practices that had quietly flourished for generations, especially among women. This created real danger for anyone associated with occult practices, inside or outside the palace walls. Fortune-tellers, herbalists, and women known for producing charms suddenly found themselves at risk of public condemnation, or worse. Inside the harem, this religious pressure added a new layer to political intrigue. Accusing a rival of practicing Büyü wasn't just a social weapon anymore. It could carry serious religious and legal consequences, aligning your enemy with heresy in an era when the line between magic and forbidden religious deviation was taken extremely seriously by reformist clergy. Court records from this period show increased scrutiny of women suspected of occult practices, and some historians link this climate of religious anxiety to several purges and expulsions from the harem during the mid-17th century, a time already notorious for its power struggles and violent successions. When a woman in the harem was formally accused of sorcery, especially if that sorcery was linked to harming the sultan or a prince, the consequences could be swift and brutal. Unlike ordinary court cases, these accusations rarely went through open trial. A sultan's suspicion, or a valide sultan's decision, could be enough to seal someone's fate. The most infamous method of execution reserved for harem women was drowning. The accused would be sewn into a weighted sack and thrown into the Bosphorus under cover of darkness, a method chosen specifically because it left no blood inside the sacred palace walls and no public spectacle to explain. Strangulation by silk cord, performed by the palace's mute executioners, was another method used for high-status women, since Ottoman tradition forbade shedding royal or near-royal blood. In less severe cases, an accused woman might simply be exiled to the old palace in Istanbul, a kind of retirement home for out-of-favor harem women, effectively erased from power and memory without formal execution. The severity of punishment often had less to do with actual guilt and more to do with how many enemies or how few protectors the accused woman had at court. Not all magic in the harem was meant to harm. Most of it, in fact, was defensive. Women commissioned protective amulets called muska, small folded papers inscribed with Quranic verses or numerological symbols, sewn into fabric pouches and worn against the skin or hidden in clothing. These were created by religious scholars or specialized amulet writers and were considered entirely legitimate, unlike the darker practices associated with cursing rivals. The evil eye, or nazar, was an enormous source of daily anxiety, the belief that envy or admiration, even unintentional, could bring misfortune. Blue glass beads shaped like eyes were, and still are, hung everywhere in Turkish culture to deflect this danger. In the harem specifically, new mothers surrounded their infants with layers of protective charms, since infant mortality was tragically high, and any sudden illness in a child could be attributed to a jealous rival's envious gaze. Historians examining surviving harem-era textiles and personal items have found amulets sewn directly into infant garments and bedding, physical evidence of just how seriously these protective beliefs were taken by women whose children's survival could also mean their own political survival. While the harem was sealed off from the outside world, magic still found its way in through a network of women who served as go-betweens, fortune-tellers, herbalists, and folk healers, sometimes Romani women, sometimes Jewish or Christian residents of Istanbul with reputations for occult knowledge, were occasionally smuggled into contact with harem women, or their services were sought through intermediaries like servants or eunuchs. These women occupied a strange social position, sought after in secret for their perceived powers, yet vulnerable to blame and punishment if anything they were involved in went wrong. Court records occasionally mention investigations into outside women accused of supplying love charms, poisons, or curses to harem residents, cases that could implicate everyone involved, from the buyer to the seller to whoever carried the item through the palace gates. This underground economy of magic reveals something important. Despite the harem's extreme isolation, human desire for control over an uncontrollable, dangerous life found ways to reach beyond even the most heavily guarded walls in the empire. It wasn't only the women of the harem who feared witchcraft. The sultans themselves lived under constant anxiety about being bewitched, poisoned, or spiritually undermined. Several sultans are recorded as having consulted religious scholars, astrologers, and mystics for protection against curses, particularly during periods of illness, political instability, or failure to produce a male heir. Sultan Murad III, for example, was known for his deep interest in astrology and the occult, reportedly consulting with mystics regularly and surrounding himself with protective rituals. Ironic, given how many of his own consorts were later accused of practicing the very magic he sought protection from. This created a strange psychological loop within the palace. The more powerful and paranoid a sultan became about supernatural threats, the more valuable and dangerous accusations of sorcery became as political currency within the harem. A rumor that could shake the sultan's confidence in his own safety was a rumor with real teeth, capable of destroying reputations and lives in an instant, precisely because the person with absolute power over everyone's fate genuinely believed, at least in part, that magic could reach him. Let's return to Kösem Sultan's final hours, because they perfectly capture how political conspiracy and the language of sorcery intertwined at the very highest level of the empire. By 1651, an elderly Kösem was maneuvering to maintain control over the throne, allegedly plotting to replace her grandson Sultan Mehmed IV with another prince more loyal to her. Her rival, Turhan Sultan, Mehmed's mother, moved first. According to court accounts, palace agents loyal to Turhan cornered Kösem in the harem at night. She reportedly tried to hide inside a linen closet and was strangled to death, her body allegedly found afterwards stripped of the jewels and precious objects she had spent decades accumulating. In the aftermath, propaganda circulated blaming Kösem for years of alleged supernatural manipulation, reframing her extraordinary political skill as evidence of dark influence rather than genuine ability. This pattern, a powerful woman's death followed by retroactive accusations of witchcraft to justify the killing, appears again and again throughout harem history, revealing how sorcery often functioned less as a real belief and more as a convenient narrative applied after the fact to explain away inconvenient female power. By now, you might be wondering, how much of this was actual magic and how much was later, legend layered onto real political events? This is exactly the challenge historians face when studying harem intrigue. Many of our sources come from foreign ambassadors, later Ottoman chroniclers writing decades after events occurred, or European travelers whose accounts were often shaped by their own fascination and prejudice toward what they imagined as an exotic, mysterious world behind harem walls. Some tales were almost certainly exaggerated or invented entirely to explain sudden deaths, unexpected successions, or inconvenient shifts in power that were, in reality, the product of cold, calculated politics rather than curses. At the same time, we know from surviving court records, legal documents, and archaeological evidence like preserved amulets that belief in magic was genuinely widespread and sincerely held, not merely a dramatic flourish added by later storytellers. The truth likely sits in the uncomfortable middle: real poison, real political murder, and real spiritual belief, all blended together into a single, terrifying reputation that the harem has never fully shaken off centuries later. For every tragic story of accusation and execution, there were women who mastered this dangerous world and survived, even thrived, for decades. Nurbanu, Safiye, and Kösem herself all navigated years, sometimes decades, of relentless political danger before their eventual falls, wielding influence over an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Their survival required an extraordinary combination of political intelligence, careful alliance building with eunuchs and court officials, genuine understanding of Ottoman law and succession politics, and yes, sometimes participation in the very intrigue, magical or otherwise, that could just as easily destroy them. It's worth remembering that despite the harem's reputation for victimhood and danger, many of its most notable women were not passive figures caught in circumstance, but skilled political operators who understood the rules of their world better than almost anyone around them, including the sultans they served. Their legacy, stripped of exaggerated legend, still stands as proof of remarkable resilience and strategic brilliance within one of history's most restrictive and dangerous political systems. The legend of the witchy, dangerous harem didn't stay locked in Ottoman history. It exploded into global popular culture. Modern Turkish television dramas, most famously Muhteşem Yüzyıl, Magnificent Century, reintroduced Hürrem, Kösem, and the world of harem, intrigued to millions of viewers worldwide, often leaning into the dramatic, magical, conspiratorial elements for entertainment value. These shows, while historically inspired, take significant creative liberties, blending documented events with pure legend and modern dramatic invention. This matters because much of what people today assume they know about harem witchcraft actually comes from these modern reinterpretations, rather than primary historical sources. It's a fascinating example of how a centuries-old political and religious belief system got filtered through Orientalist fantasy, then reclaimed and dramatized by Turkish media, and is now consumed by audiences worldwide who often can't easily tell where documented history ends and creative fiction begins. Understanding this layered history, real politics, real belief, and centuries of storytelling is key to appreciating just how enduring and complex the harem's reputation truly is. Today, visitors can walk through the preserved harem quarters of Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, now a museum, and see the very spaces where these stories unfolded. The ornate tiled walls, the narrow servant corridors, the chambers of the Valide Sultan, and the golden road that concubines once walked to reach the Sultan's private quarters. Museum Collections House recovered amulets, personal items, and court documents that give us small, tangible glimpses into the real lives behind the legends. Walking through these rooms today, it's hard not to feel the weight of centuries of ambition, fear, brilliance, and tragedy contained within these walls. The Ottoman harem wasn't a fantasy palace of endless luxury without consequence. It was one of the most intensely competitive, high-stakes political environments in world history, where a woman's intelligence, alliances, and yes, sometimes her willingness to embrace the era's darkest beliefs determined whether she lived in power or died in silence, sewn into a sack at the bottom of the Bosphorus. So, was the Ottoman harem really full of witches casting deadly spells? The honest answer is more fascinating than any simple yes or no. It was a world where genuine spiritual belief, ruthless political ambition, real poison, and centuries of storytelling all merged into one unforgettable legend. A legend so powerful that it still captivates audiences, historians, and filmmakers hundreds of years later. The women of the harem lived in a world where survival demanded intelligence, sharper than any blade, and instincts more reliable than any charm. And whether or not they truly believed in magic, they absolutely understood the magic of fear itself. If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden, dangerous, and extraordinary history of the Ottoman Empire. And let us know in the comments, do you think it was really witchcraft, or just the most brilliant political game ever played? See you in the next video.